Hello and welcome to another fantastic interview here with Pursue Network Online. I'm joined today by someone from the other side of the world, by Jonathan from America, and he's going to introduce himself in a second. But firstly, before I do that, if you don't know who we are Pursue Network, a charity based in the southwest of England. You are all welcome to watch this. You haven't got to be in Devon and Cornwall to join in with the conversation. But we're looking forward today to finding out some wisdom and digging deep into Jonathan's mind so that we can learn from his experience over in America. So, Jonathan, who are you and why are we talking to you today?
Yeah, so my name is Jonathan Malm. I've worked in churches. I have helped churches through my companies, Sunday Social, Church Stage Design Ideas was a site I ran for a while. So love helping churches. I've led worship, done a lot of different things in the church world. I was a missionary kid, pastor's kid, so very, very entrenched in especially the American church culture, but even internationally as well. So, but still, I love the church, and I love God's manifestation through the church. That's a very spiritual, just
Yes.
what God is doing through the church, right? I believe that the church is the hope for the world. So, yeah. So, I know you reached out to me because I wrote a book called "Don't Burn Out, Burn Bright,"
Mm.
which is it's kind of like an anti-burnout book. It's about how to actually thrive in ministry, not just how to like avoid burnout, but actually how to be healthy, which I think is possible. And then I make, silly little videos on Instagram, which you reached out to me from Instagram. And so they're just about what it's like to work in a church. A lot of it is just catharsis through realizing that we're not alone. We all experience a lot of the same things if we work in a church. So that's kind of who I am.
Brilliant. And I think that phrase there, "you're not alone," is a key thing for Pursue Network. A lot of our churches are rural in the region. You're quite distant from everyone else, and sometimes it can feel quite alone. And so part of the
Hmm.
purpose of the network is to try and connect people, to help them that they're not alone in this, that they are with other people. We're cheering them on as they go. Whether it be in a big church in the middle of a city, or whether it's a small farmyard meeting with 6 people gathering with some sheep in the corner, and all that sort of fun. So yeah, that's really good. You
Yeah,
mentioned that
I've
you've led
I've
you.
been I've been in that environment. We lived
Oh,
whenever I was young, my dad was pastoring a church in like so there's a small town called Kerrville, Texas. We were outside of the small town. So very, very rural. I remember one day in the middle of my dad's sermon, like 10 guys got up because a deer had gotten hit on the road, like a car had hit a road. They saw it outside and they ran out and they took care of it and it was very so I relate to those small and large
that's
environments.
fantastic. I love that. Love that. You mentioned that you led worship in the past.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Um,
in college, when I went to university, if we're using more international terminology, I started working for the church my dad was pastoring, more just like on the tech and kind of doing media stuff. And then when I graduated, I moved into leading worship full time. Well, worship plus creative, all sorts of things. But yeah, I got a chance to lead some really cool guys into boys and girls into leading worship for our church.
Amazing. What would you say is your number one lesson you learned from a mistake when you were leading worship?
It all It all has to do with, I think, insecurity. Every mistake that I made that I'm like, oh, why did I do that? Saying something stupid, um, you know, interrupting the set because of my own ego, because I was trying to, make people think I was cool or perfect. It was always about that, sometimes you just address the elephant in the room and point out, hey, that I remember one time I think I didn't do a good job at getting the key. We were going from I think D to the next song was in G, and I don't know why I didn't think that I needed the key. Like, but I mean because the chords were already so similar, I think I started in D, and then my voice I just kept like changing keys until I got to the G. I think I was going up like a step at a time or a half step at a time. Then I finally got there. And I went along with it, and I should have just probably stopped and said, "I'm sorry, guys, I didn't get the key on that." Truth be told, probably, maybe only 10% of the people even knew that something happened, but that was a fun day.
Oh yeah, and I think it's so important that we are human on stage. If you're leading worship, you're not leading worship as some magical person with
Yeah.
special skills. You're leading worship as a human who's going to make mistakes, who's going to get things wrong, and better just to say, "Hey, let's stop, let's start again, let's get this right." In fact, I
Yeah.
literally did that the other week. Last week I was leading worship, led a song that I wrote, but I've recently changed the second line, and I sang the old first line. And I thought, no, no, we're not going to sing the old words. I've got better words. They're on the screen. We're going to start again. Let's go for a second round. So yeah, it's good fun.
Yeah, it's a struggle in the lyrics. I know there have been a few times, and I know you're not legally allowed to do this, but I've changed the lyrics to songs, and I'm like, I don't like the theology of that, or
Yeah,
I don't like what that's the implications of what that's communicating. I
yeah,
know that song. There was that one song. It's a great song. The cross has the final word.
yeah,
And I'm like, it's kind of I kind of don't like that because the cross didn't have the final word. I get that, the cross is the power of, whatever, but like
yeah.
it didn't really have the final word. Jesus had the final word. So I changed that lyric, and I know that's not technically allowed, but I was happy to do it.
But I think it's really important that you do. I think when you know your context and you know
Hmm.
the people who are singing, you want to make sure they're singing something that makes sense with the theology that your church is teaching. And
Yeah.
if you've got a song like that, obviously you can teach around it so people understand what's being sung. But if you're
Yeah.
teaching it outside of the original context, you need to make sure it's still acceptable and accessible to your congregation.
Yeah, I mean, I love that line. There's that, I forget what the song is, but it says something about you will have your bride free from all our guilt, free from all our shame. Uh, and I hated leading that song without giving context. I'm like, we need to make sure people understand this because as a male who maybe is a little biblically illiterate, you're like, what are you talking about? It can be very off-putting.
Yeah. And let's not even get started on the different models of atonement and how we
Oh
interpret
yeah.
atonement in various. That's just a whole different kettle of fish. Yeah,
Oh yeah,
let's
I
not
don't
go
want to
there.
get into that deep water.
Fantastic. So obviously you've got some experience leading worship. You work in a church environment. What's your current job at the church you're at now?
Yeah, so I don't currently work at a church. I volunteer with my church, really good friends with my pastor, but I actually help churches through this company called Sunday Social, and we make social media graphics that churches can use, and that's my full-time thing. I actually I've enjoyed not working at a church so that I can actually give, I don't know, it feels like I'm able to even minister more because it's not my job.
Yeah,
I can, I'm not stuck in all the meetings, all the things that kind of make you forget that you're actually in ministry, and I can actually focus on just ministering.
yeah. And that's really important, isn't it? To actually focus on ministering not just to the one church, but to the church as a whole body.
Yeah, that's huge. I think that's something we regularly forget. I don't think there are many churches that don't want to be collaborative and don't want to work with other
Yeah,
churches, but we get so caught in the weekly grind of Sunday to Sunday, we just don't make time for it. And I think that's a tragedy. I think we should do that. We should prioritize that more.
yeah. Absolutely. Now, obviously, it would be foolish of me to talk about Sunday Social or talk to you, sorry, without mentioning Sunday Social and the work you're doing. Little chance here, an opportunity for you to promote what you're doing as a service to churches. So you create graphics that they can use.
Yeah.
What else do you?
Yeah,
What's your?
so we're a library of graphics. That's primarily what we do. We have some courses and we have some other things, but the unfortunate thing is we misspell a lot of words for your context. So savior, color, all horribly misspelled. So
Yeah.
we do have Photoshop files and Canva templates if you need to correct those errors on our part.
Oh, don't worry. The number of people who import lyrics into ProPresenter or into whatever software
Mm,
they're using and just go straight to Google, they put it on. Even songs
yeah.
written in this country, Google
Oh
has
yeah.
them as the American spellings because obviously America's more likely to use them. There are more of you, and so
Well,
of
there's a
course we
lot of
then.
us.
Yeah, the number of times I've seen "save you" on the screen without the "u" in it, and it's like, come on, it's the American
I think
spelling.
it's
But
I think it's
yeah,
just time you guys embrace the American spelling of things. I think it's time.
well, maybe we'll see what happens. We'll see. Yeah. So obviously, Sunday Social, great resource. What made you what inspired you to start that up?
Yeah, I mean, every time that I've started something, church stages and ideas, any type of extra business, it's always been, I feel like a need that was under-resourced. With churches for the last 20, 30 years, there've been a bunch of great companies focused on content for Sunday morning, creating videos, creating motion graphics, backgrounds, and very well resourced. Suddenly the shift changed. The shift took place where the majority of our media needs were actually throughout the week. Like if we wanted to communicate through this platform that was suddenly available to us through social media, and we all started getting a vision for it, how are we going to do that? Like I don't have time. I barely have enough time to get Sunday morning ready. So how am I going to communicate people with the throughout the week? So that was kind of the goal. And then COVID suddenly made everyone realize, oh my gosh, if we're not communicating with our people through social media, what are we doing? We have nothing. We have nothing if we're during
Yeah.
lockdowns, right? But even beyond that, like why aren't we using this more effectively to reach and talk to our people throughout the week? So yeah, I think that there was it was a sudden shift that everyone realized, but it's been happening for a long time. COVID just accelerated it.
Oh, without a doubt. The impact COVID had on church was incredible. The number of people who suddenly had technology being installed in their church so they could stream
Yeah.
things live and engaging with people. And now the people at home who are poorly going, actually, we can now join them in church because you're streaming it as default. It's the normal thing you do
Yeah.
now. What a
And I mean,
difference.
the thing that I'm grateful for from COVID is that it showed us that the things that mattered most about church were not the things that happened from, when the countdown hit zero to when we said the final amen. The things that we cared about the most were talking to people before and after service, seeing people's eyes, letting, them checking on us and saying, "How are you doing?" And then we say, "Oh, good," but our eyes don't say good, so then they can actually dig and probe a little bit further. Those are the things that really
Yeah,
matter the most. And I think we all noticed that because now, during COVID, if you wanted to tune into a really great sermon, it probably wasn't at your church. You could probably find
yeah,
some other church that was streaming their services and tune in. So, we didn't need better content. We needed better community.
yeah. And that is key, isn't it? Having a community, the whole point of a local church is it's for
Hmm.
local people. You can connect and dig deeper. I
Yeah.
remember someone told me a while back that Jesus had 12 disciples. He did have a clique. There was a
Hmm.
close knit group of people that were his central group, but it was a healthy clique because it was open to other people. It was never
Yeah.
an exclusive, well, you're not one of the disciples, sorry, you can't come over here. It was always, we are open, join us, learn from us, and at times we'll do our thing. But yeah,
Yeah. I
community
mean,
was
I
key.
think it was always, they were always going out. It was never about
Mm,
let's gather just with ourselves. It was always like, let's bring more people in.
yeah. So any things about obviously you're also obviously it's late. I've spent the whole day. You're the third person I'm interviewing today by
Oh,
coincidence, and I've just finished 3 hours of maths tuition, so my tongue's a little bit bleh at the moment. And in my head, I'm still solving quadratic equations and
oh,
ratios and all sorts. So yeah, I'm a little bit bleary-eyed here, but it's all good fun. It's all good fun. What was I going to say? I've lost where I was now. I'll cut this bit out in a minute because I don't want to include this whole pausing waffle.
yeah. I don't
You
know.
mentioned
You were
volunteering.
volunteering. There we go.
Yes, so you mentioned volunteering. You are also, I've noticed one of your books was about how you engage with volunteers and how you encourage them to engage. So it's not just people being used for their time, actually being valued for the time that they're
Yeah.
offering. Have you got any top tips for the people who are running churches in the southwest on those sort of lines?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things that kind of kept coming back in the volunteer effect you're talking about is the idea that, a small church typically to grow needs to start operating a little bit more organized with more systems in place, with more like that needs to happen as you grow, right? The problem is that volunteering needs to be very personal. And I think small churches, in an attempt to try to be big churches or be more professional, sometimes systematize. Planning center is a wonderful tool, but if that's the only way you're communicating with the volunteer, um, man, you're losing people. You're not really doing it. Like we pitch volunteering as a way to get connected, to minister, to really get deep in community, to use your talents for God. And then what it ends up being is, a weekly email from Planning Center, like, "Hey, can you serve this week?" Nope. Check yes or no, right? Like very impersonal. So the biggest thing that whether you're a small church or a large church is just be in community with your volunteers. Text them a personal conversation, not a copy pasted conversation. Say, "Hey, I'm so grateful for what you did last week with X. Just want to say thank you so much for being involved." And don't even ask for something. And then, a couple days later, you can say, "Hey, by the way, do you want to serve?" But that personal touch is so important. And I think it's what people are desperate for. I mean, again, we talked about that with the community element that COVID exposed, the idea that we need community. That's what we want the most. We don't need a perfect service. We don't need amazing content. We need people that can hug us and talk to us and ask us about our day.
Absolutely. I mean, let's face it, the number of people in COVID who suddenly felt alone, who felt
Hmm.
disjointed in some way, and those simple chats, those simple conversations, simple messages being sent to them to say, "How are you?" That
Yeah,
was
and
all it
that
needed.
loneliness that hasn't gone away. It's still there.
No.
Like we all still feel really disconnected. It's just with technology, it's becoming more and more, we communicate through our device, not
Yeah.
through our faces, which is it's sad.
Yeah. And again, I think it's also a difference between shallow community and actual deep, meaningful community.
Yeah.
Church needs to be a place where you haven't got to wear a mask. You can go in and be yourself and be honest, knowing that
No,
it's not.
not relating, not we're not this is not a political statement of
Yeah. So suddenly aware. Yeah. obviously different cultures and everything else, but there's a sense of I'm very aware. So just so that people watching know, we are recording this on the 6th of November, and the new president has just been announced in America, and so on our
Yes.
minds, obviously, there's some little background messages going on there. But I was thinking more about a sermon that I was listening to several years ago with Hillsong in London, and we popped in to visit the church. And the main message, I mean, the worship was interesting. It wasn't what I was used to, and it was certainly very much built toward a track system. So each song felt like I'd listened to it on Spotify a few times until we got to the end, and when it started being more relaxed and repeating, and I thought that's fine. That's their
Yeah.
style. People were enjoying it. It's all good. Then the sermon came, and at one point he seemed to sort of almost go off message and say, "Oh, just so you know, you lot out there, take your masks off. When I talk to you in a minute, when I come down to that congregation and say, 'How are you?' I do not want you to say, 'I'm okay,' like a polite British person. I want you to tell me how you are." And I thought,
Yeah.
yes, that's what we need. Again, the British, very polite, very reserved. "How are you today?" "Yes, I'm very good,
Mhm.
thank you." "Okay, my mum has just died, and my dog is
Yeah.
dead as well. And just so you know, my house burnt down last night, but I'm doing really fine. It's okay."
Oh yeah.
We need to be honest and open with our emotions. So,
I mean, the U.S. is really similar, where it's, whereas British, it's more of the politeness, the refined, the, kind of stoic. We are that plus rebellious. So we, if you've ever seen, there was these old advertisements about the Marlboro Man, the Marlboro cigarettes, and he was, the lone cowboy on the range, smoking his cigarettes, not needing anyone, being completely independent, completely self-fulfilling and self-sufficient, and that's American culture. So the same thing, where like we will not ask for help, we will not, but it's not so much of a being polite, it's like, no, I got this, and
yeah.
it's just as unhealthy.
Yeah, without a doubt. So obviously, when you're in that place, often when you're not asking for help and you need it, it can lead to burnout. Smooth transition.
Mhm.
So, and again, one of your books was about how to avoid burnout and how to
Yeah.
respond to that. Um, Tell me more.
Yeah, so really, the problem with burnout is that it's never just one. Well, it's usually one thing for you, but there's not one symptom that everyone deals with. Some people have burnout, for them is because of a lack of healthy boundaries, right? Like, we just say yes to everything. Everyone has needs. Everyone has opinions, and we just let them all affect us, right? The adage was to love your neighbor. In the scripture, Jesus told us to love our neighbor. And who is our neighbor? Whoever comes across you. Unfortunately, in modern times, back then that was maybe 10, 20, 100 people in a day that came across you. Those were your neighbors. We have 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 people through social media, through our churches, through that have access to us. And we have to be a little bit more careful about who we give access to us. Not that we push people away, but that we create, like in the book, we talk about gates. Gates let people in, and we choose when to let people in. The goal is, it's not, we're not building walls, but we're building gates, so it's appropriate, right? So boundaries is one issue. Um, Perfectionism is another issue, especially in worship, where we feel like we have to, and this is probably what I dealt with the most as a worship leader, is I wanted everyone, I was young, I wanted everyone to think I was amazing. I wanted everyone to think I was flawless, I was perfect. And that meant everything that I did had to be perfect. And that relentless pursuit of perfection will wear you down, because you aren't perfect. Ministry is not perfect. Your people aren't perfect. In fact, you trying to be perfect is probably pushing people away. So there's we identified 10 pillars of health, and unhealth in any of those areas. Obviously, spiritual is an obvious one, right? Like, we almost didn't write about that in the book, because it was like, if you work in a church, that should be right, like the primary thing. But yeah, so there's 10 pillars, and there's a risk of unhealth in one of those, and sustained lack of health will lead to burnout. Burnout isn't one of those things. You wake up and suddenly you realize you're burnt out, but it wasn't a sudden snapping. You didn't suddenly snap and get to burnout. It was a long journey down into burnout. And the unfortunate thing is, once you get there, it's a long journey back out.
Oh yes, I was a primary school teacher for 14 years, and I remember the very last year. I just received a prophetic word from a Christian event that summer, inviting me almost to start majority time ministry. The question was literally, when are you starting majority time ministry? And I thought, well, I'm a full time teacher. I can't start majority time ministry until that's done. I need to pray about this. And then the end of the first term, I was approaching Christmas, and it got to that point where I started feeling really ill, really down. So help. Okay, I'm struggling a bit here to keep up with everything I'm supposed to be doing. ended up with flu, was signed off for 2 weeks, came back on the Thursday, walked into the school thinking, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, but I've got this, I'm almost there, and I don't want to miss the last week before Christmas. Head teacher walks up to me, just don't forget, its data deadline is tomorrow. I need all 10 subjects fully assessed for all 30 children in your class by tomorrow morning, so
Oh,
that I can do all my data analysis at the weekend. And that was the first trigger for me to go, you know what, I think I need to step into this prophetic word. I think the time could be soon. But I waited till after Christmas. I waited a little bit longer because I thought I could be reacting wrong here. And just
mhm.
felt, yeah, I'm not operating as I used to. I'm not operating in the full strength of who I am anymore. I'm operating from a place of being burnt out,
Yeah.
exhausted by the system. And like you said, it took a long time to get back to full energy again.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I mean, you make a good point that I think sometimes people, they might think they're burnt out. And that's one of that's one of those indicators that you are burnt out is the
Mm.
thing that should be like, I got this.
Yeah.
This is my competence. I got this. This is no problem. Suddenly you're not good at that. And you're like, what
Mm.
is going on? That's a sign that you're probably burning out. Whenever you start getting snappy at your family, the people that love you the most, when you
Mm.
just get that. Yeah, there's a lot of indicators, but it's important to address it, figure out what put you on the path to burnout, and then start dismantling that mess that got you there.
So any healthy tips for people? Because you mentioned gatekeeping, which I think
Hmm.
is really important. Having those gates they're not closed walls like you said. They are opportunities for people to come in, but you're very aware of protecting that time. If
Yeah,
someone contacts you knowing your diary is empty, but you've sort of said that this is my time to recharge, and you need that time to recharge, what would you say
yeah.
is, again, probably from a British perspective, what's the polite way to let them know actually this is my time? But what would you say is a piece of advice there?
I mean, first of all, don't give people access to your calendar if you can. I know that's not a possibility in some situations, but um, one thing that revolutionized my life when I was working at a church, I was just out of college. I had a ton of energy. I was not married. I was single. I was just out of college. I loved ministry. So anytime somebody would ask me for something, hey, can you be here? Can you help me with this? Can you do this? The answer was always yes. Like I can always make time, right? But my dad, my pastor at the time, he pointed out the idea that rest is just as important as activity. And if you don't value rest, you're always going to find that chunk of gap in your schedule and you're going to fill it with something. But whenever I budget my money, I tell every single dollar where to go, right? Like that's the goal of a good budget, right? You say and the same thing with our time. We tell every bit of our time where it should go. So if you're not planning rest and valuing it as an important item in your agenda, you're always going to be burnt out. You're always going to be doing something and never rest. So rest is important. I mean, 1 out of 7 days, God told us to rest, right? Like it's not even 10%. It's more than 10%, right? He gave us a big standard of rest.
Yeah.
So it's important that we actually block it out in our calendar. And if someone has access to your calendar, you could put a code word in there for yourself, like um prison, whatever whatever you want to call it, right? Just say like, this is what I'm going to be doing
Yeah,
this during this time, and they can fill in the blanks for themselves. But it's
yeah,
just to know like this is what I'm going to be doing.
yeah. I like that. And again, obviously, when we book this session, one thing I tend to do is give people access to my calendar, which is probably a personal mistake. But also, I'm very aware that there's
Well,
big gaps in it, and for what we're doing here, it's a really effective way of organising time.
yeah, there
But
are
yeah,
those
yeah,
tools like you use. There's a tool that but you can set these are the times that I'm unavailable, right?
yeah,
Like that's the best
yeah.
thing. If you just have your full calendar in there, be careful.
I will say, for you, I did open up everything. So I thought, because we're
Oh,
internationally different, I thought this is going to be a challenge to find a
I
time that
appreciate
works. So
that.
I'm really grateful that you're here today because this has worked out for us all. So yeah, this is
Yeah, I'm
good.
glad.
Yeah. So also, the other thing you do is you run a lot of work with social media. And as
Mhm.
you know, I've responded to a few of the things you posted because I get excited and sort of see things and wonder and ask questions. What is it like to run an account where you're putting out different sort of humorous jokes or putting out videos that aren't necessarily linked to a church brand, but are just supposed to be a bit of fun?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've learned in the last few years is the idea that humor and empathy are powerful in and of themselves. So the videos that I make, my goal is just to be relatable. My goal is to put my finger on maybe a pain point and just say, I've been there, or
Mm.
oh, you're not alone there. And whenever you point out that thing that's very relatable, like, oh my gosh, that's so me, or I've done that, it makes people laugh. I don't know that my content is particularly funny, but it points out something that I
Yeah,
relate to, right? And so there
yeah,
is just this natural release of like, oh gosh, it releases the tension inside of you to say, I'm not the only person who felt that way, right? And it's funny because I was on this podcast the other day, and there's and I kind of had this revelation when we were talking. I was talking to a counselor that empathy in and of itself can heal people.
mm,
Just the idea that someone else knows what I'm going through helps me take a step back and
mm,
see my situation a little bit more clearly. Because whenever you're in the week to week, Sunday to Sunday grind, you can start creating duct tape solutions, or masking tape solutions, or whatever kind of tape. You just kind of sort of tape things together. Like, I just have to get through this Sunday, and you put temporary solutions in place to get you through, but that long term are going to break apart and actually hurt your ministry. And so one of the things that I love helping churches and helping people at church do is just think through, is this actually helping me long term, or is this harming me? I might get through this Sunday, but it's going to harm me in the long term. And that's what I try to do in a subtle way with my content. Just maybe point out things that, like, hey, this is not maybe the best way to do them, even though this is the way we all do them.
yeah. And I guess my sense of humour, I find them funny sometimes. I'm almost laughing at the church, laughing at
Hmm.
itself. And I
Yeah,
think if we have that sense of not taking it personally, but just taking it as, you know what, yeah, that's us. Let's all talk about the circles. Let's all talk about
yeah.
the home, all the different things.
That's the
I,
goal. Is
yeah,
I always want it to be us laughing at us, not
yeah,
me laughing at you, right? Like, I was in Argentina. My wife's family lives in Argentina, and none of them are like evangelical Christians, or there's like they're Catholic, but like by association, right? But I was telling one of them, yeah, I make videos for churches, and then I finally showed her one of those, like, the circles are better than rows videos, and she's like, "You're just making fun of churches," and I'm like, "Well, yes, but we like it."
yeah.
Like, it's us, so it's definitely the heart. The heart is important behind that. I don't want to just be trashing the church. I want to be making light of ourselves.
100%. 100%. Just out of interest, do you know why we have pews in church and why there's not so much dancing in church? Probably more of a British thing than an American thing.
I thought it was just a practicality thing where you just have rows of things instead of having individual chairs. It's kind of a lot easier to
Yeah.
just set up a bench, right?
Yeah, so when they put the sort of rows in and they put the big pews in, they were trying to structure the churches and control people in a certain way, and obviously convenience. Once it's in, it's in, it's done. But then what happened is that people started inventing dances that you could dance in rows,
Uh-huh.
and these dances were called carol dances. And again, this is an RV. This is going back to my lectures now at university when I was training to be a teacher,
Teach
and I
me.
discovered it then. It was like, wow. And so everyone had to hold hands, and then one person would lead them around the room and almost tie knots in the rows. So you'd have to
Uh-huh.
climb out and do all sorts of fun things with it. But everyone was dancing in rows to the point that the stone floors were starting to get worn away. So then the church leaders went, well, I'm sorry, these dancers have to stop. You need to go outside. Go outside. You dance in your circles outside in the courtyard, and we'll stay in our straight lines in here. Which I think is that's what sort of triggered my mind when I saw the original video with the circles and lines thing. It was like, oh, historical moments here. So you go outside to do your circles, yeah, and then we'll do our lines in here. But then they were called carol dances, and the tunes and melodies that were used, some of those melodies became the tunes that we now use for Christmas carols.
Hmm.
So the dancing tunes snuck back into the church through the Christmas carol movement.
That's fascinating.
So yeah, just I find all things weird and sort of little moments you think that's a little tiny fact. I hadn't even thought about that. And
I
yeah,
think I think about that every time I go to a Catholic church, because I'm in a much more non-denominational church,
mm,
uh, and it seems so foreign to me, the Catholic Church,
mm,
the liturgy and stuff like that, and I'm like, wow, they really have strayed far from the New Testament, right? Like, it's what Protestants believe, right? But then
yeah,
I think about a Catholic walking into our church and the same thing, or like, wow, they've really strayed far from the New
yeah,
Testament. Like, we have this history of building traditions on traditions on
mm,
traditions, and we've kind of separated, but it's all the same, where we've kind of created this thing that, and it's not a bad thing, like even the modern worship movement is, it's kind of created, like they weren't they didn't have a PA system, and they didn't have an electric guitar, and they weren't, there wasn't a fog machine, like there wasn't all this stuff. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's something we've created. And I think when we start getting too um, precious with those things that we've created, we're in trouble.
Oh, without a doubt. And so there's the old story of the letter of complaint went into the church, which said, "I can't believe that these ridiculous words of these ridiculous songs we're singing now. I can't believe how loud the instruments are. It's a complete disgrace. We need to go back to the old ways." And this letter was written about Isaac Watts when I survey the wondrous cross, and the instrument they were complaining about was the organ.
Ugh.
And
It
so,
is pretty loud, to be fair.
but similarly, I was actually I've been studying theology at a local college, trying to get a master's in theology, and as part of it, we have to travel to London. And we were in London, and a friend of mine is at a different end of the spectrum to me, on the same bookshelf with our faith. That's the way I always imagine it. On the same bookshelf, we both believe and are firm believers, but he's much more Anglo-Catholic than I am.
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, do you want to come to the Anglo-Catholic Church and witness a mass? Don't take part," he said. There's certain rules and regulations.
Yeah.
That's fine, but come and watch it and see what happens. So I came in, sat down, and the peacefulness and the quiet of this building was just beautiful. The atmosphere
Yeah.
was incredible. The sense of the presence of God was incredible. The service itself, I didn't hear a single word. Everything was whispered out of respect for what was going on. But every
Hmm.
now and again, someone next to me would stand up or sit down or do a cross or open a scripture or say a phrase. And I was thinking, I have no idea. No, I will admit, my right ear doesn't work, my left ear does, but they were on my left side doing all this action. So I had the best opportunity I could to be able to hear what was going on. And still I was like, okay, let's just get up, let's sit down, be quiet. And at one point, I got up when I should have sat down and did the opposite when they did the opposite. And it's like, no, they'll forgive me, this is grace. And that's
Yeah.
it, though. Every expression is so beautiful. We
Yeah.
live in a diverse world that we need to embrace.
Agreed.
There is this also a beautiful image in heaven of all tribes and nations gathering. And whenever I look at that, I always think it does say every tribe and nation. You can still see that they are every tribe and nation. You can still hear different tongues being spoken out. There is
Oh yeah.
unity in diversity, not conformity.
Yeah, I think
So
that's
yeah,
that's always been my perspective on church is the few times that my wife and I have had to look for a church because we moved to another city. uh, I visit maybe one or two, and I'm like, yay, let's go, because
mm,
it's just, as long as they're being intentional, as long as
mm,
the heart is there. What I experienced in Guatemala in the small mountain churches, where there was a guitar missing a few strings, and it was all kind of out of tune and out of key, but the heart was there. That's beautiful. So whether it's a 5,000 member church, whether it's a 50 member church, if they're worshiping God, it's a beautiful expression.
and that's the key thing, isn't it? That we worship God, which feels like a really lovely place just to wrap this up and say, actually, the focus is worshiping God in all that we do. So thank you
Yeah.
for your time. Thank you for what you're doing with Sunday Social and what you're doing on your account with your. I'm calling them funny videos because I find them funny, but with your observations, I was saying.
Yes, there you go. There,
Yeah,
that'll work.
yeah, really, really grateful, and hopefully talk again sometime in the future. So yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.